Assessing journal quality. So when we conduct a literature review, you are going to find papers, and those papers are written in journals. And the question is, how do you know if it's a good journal? Like, is this something I should believe or trust, or is this something I should possibly not weigh that seriously? So how do you assess journal quality? The most typical way to assess journal quality is through impact factors. For instance, I've published a few papers in the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience, and if you go to the journal homepage, you'll notice that they proudly state their impact factor of 3.225. It's an okay impact factor, and it's hard to assess these impact factors, and it does require a bit of expertise. But generally, if you're above 1, you're heading in the right direction, and the poor journals are far below that. Now, some people would argue that 1 is a fairly low number, and it is field specific. I'll give you some examples. At least in 2016, the highest impact factor journal in science was the CAA Cancer Journal for Clinicians with 187.040. That's quite a high impact factor. On this list, the one that you might see neuroscience or kinesiology type research or psychology research is Nature, which is 40.137. It's a very hard journal to publish in, and it's got a big impact factor, which literally means lots of people pay attention to the articles that are in there. So the classic way to assess journal quality is that it's got a decent impact factor, but you might need a bit of advice from a librarian or from a professor who works in the space to give you a feel for what a good impact factor is. One thing to be aware of when you're assessing journal quality is predatory journals. In the last sort of 10 to 15 years, there's been an increase in journals that are predatory in nature. And what I mean by that is they're not real journals. The heart of the scientific publishing process is what we call peer review. And what that means was when you submit your paper, other scientists read it and evaluate whether or not the paper should be published. Predatory journals don't do that. They basically charge you a fee, and if you pay the fee, your article gets published. The tricky part is that these journals, to the uninitiated, look like regular journals, and they have names like regular journals. So how do you tell if a journal is predatory in nature? Well, one key piece is the impact factor. Predatory journals have either no impact factor or it's extremely, extremely low. A second thing is the pay to publish aspect. If you do some research on the journal and they're basically saying pay this and you have a paper, that's a pretty good sign it's a predatory journal. With that being said, there are some open source journals. Open source journals, you pay a fee to publish, and there is a peer review process. Now, there is a debate within the scientific community about these journals, but journals like Frontiers in Neuroscience, where I've published, or PLOS ONE, are pay to publish journals, but they do have a peer review process, and they do have an impact factor. So just bear in mind that there's a difference. That just because you're paying to publish isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if you're paying to publish without peer review, it definitely is. And last but not least, there are lists. A lot of libraries and library groups have formed lists of predatory journals. So a little bit of Google research might help you find a list of predatory journals, and then you can check to see if a journal that you're considering is on that list.